I was born in London. I grew up in London. I studied in England. I came to this country in 1985, to Australia, and I started my teaching life here in earnest. I've been exhibiting in Australia since then, since 1985, and also in America between 1987 and 2001. I've always been interested in theatre ever since panto, since I was a kid, and looking at the grotesque imagery and masks that populated that stage at the time. But as I grew up and as I learnt more about theatre through reading and going to the theatre, I realised there was a more serious aspect to it than entertaining. The depiction of life on a stage was always one that intrigued me. The Greeks invented theatre in order to give human beings an idea of what it's like for the gods to look upon human activity. I was a regular visitor to the National Theatre here in London. I was intrigued by the way we could change our feeling towards people based on lighting and costume and script. So that's been really my journey this far. I've looked at the work of Beckett, Ionescu, Adamov and people like that, but also looked at films by Fellini and Godard. Painters obviously have influenced me, particularly Max Beckmann, because there is a certain theatricality about his work that I love, and Goya also, the deep shadows and the grotesqueness of it. So I think theatre has always been for me the focus of what I do. It seems to me that theatre is kind of underestimated in the visual arts. We use artists to decorate stage and make costume. Do we really talk about theatre as an experience, as a philosophy through art? I don't think there's many artists who do that. So I've set my goal to do that, to talk about not just illustrating plays by famous playwrights, but to develop my own narrative play through drawing and painting. For me, theatre is about focusing on a particular aspect of human behaviour. Tragedy, comedy, ritual, whatever it may be. And different playwrights do this in different ways. My feeling about it is that I want to extract that particular dynamic, whether it is tragedy or comedy or one's fate or one's destiny, and make that into my own play visually. The characters I use are really, I think you can look at them as me in different guises. And I think this is what art for me is about. It's about self-actualizing. People do it through studying the landscape or even still lives or the nude or whatever it may be. But for me, it's about the group composition. Growing up in the 50s in London, it was a pretty dark place. Lots of shadows, lots of fog, lots of mist. In its own way, it had its own theatrical character. And I think that was the beginning of it for me. And I did a little bit of work for set design, doing a bit of set design for amateur theatrical companies, and I love being in that space. But I think what I took from that is the ability to create my own space on the page. And that's where I've been up to since then. And I think from now, my major focus is on one's mortality. This is what I want to look at through my work. And it's not really a question of discussing death as such, but how our own mortality affects the way we feel and think about life, and affects and impinges on all of those things that give quality to life, our loves, our sense of destiny, our beliefs and so on. And that is a very complex issue, so I can't make simple compositions. It's not in me to do that. I can't reduce life to a one-liner. You'll see lots of things that are complex in my work, not readily understandable, but I think explaining the work takes the mystery away from the work. And that's what I don't want. I want people to be immersed in the mystery of the drawing as much as they're immersed in the mystery of life. When I first started listening to Bob Dylan, for example, it was the songs of Bob Dylan that really started me on this narrative. And a lot of his images are very dark. They're not necessarily playful or allude to love and innocence. But that drew me into those sort of images. The dark side interests me. The unconscious interests me. I took up a large-scale study of Carl Jung and the influence of symbolism in art. And that led me to believe that quite often the hidden treasures of one's abilities and gifts are hidden in the dark side. So although the images may appear dark, they promise something lighter in terms of what we are and can be as human beings. I work in many mediums for different reasons. I think each medium will give you a different quality and bring something different out of you. Whenever I make an etching, I'm much more involved with the process, so that allows me to stop the image at a certain point, review it, and allow the technique of etching to have its own effect on that image. Charcoal again is very different. It is much more about the dark and the light. It's more emboldened, it's more forgiving. Watercolour again will give you that ability to produce translucence if you want that kind of thing. Each medium will bring something different out of every artist. I don't believe in branding. I don't believe in that we should just concentrate on what we're good at. I think even if we're not so good at a particular medium, I think we have to pursue it if we want to do it, if we're compelled to do it, because I think it's trying to bring something out in us. Now, if I ever think at a certain point that this is not working out with a particular image, I might just change the medium, and then the image will change and my feeling towards the image will change as a result of that, and then a different narrative will come about. The spikiness of pen and ink on the paper is perfect for certain precision thoughts, certain angularity, a deliberate way of working with cross-hatching. Whereas if I want fluidity, I'll go much more into charcoal, Conte crayon, and somewhere between the two lies pencil, coloured pencil, and so on. So each medium, very importantly, has its own status. By being multi-medium in my work, that it's brought different things out of me and allowed me to review the work and see it in terms of different mediums, different applications, and different narratives. I found working with charcoal was always underrated as a medium. I think it's always been thought of, well, up until recently, as a very sketches medium. I've certainly see a charcoal drawing as something you craft. So I've learned how to start lightly and build the image. So in the first initial stages, I can erase, redraw, leave components of the drawing there if I need to. I've learned not to be too expressive with it and much more cultivated. I think it's a beautiful medium. I think the richness of it, the emboldening of the black and the white gives that a much more deep sense of theatricality and tragedy as well. It's a much more sculpted medium than the others. It can be directly, it feels like it's coming directly from the hand. Whereas all the other implements that I use, pencils, pens and so on, they feel like there's something that's an intermediate between me and my surface. Working with oils for me is always a difficult venture. I think there are so many problems that are involved with working with oil painting, but it is precisely for that reason that I continue with it, because I think we are in the business of problem solving. So when we're using oils, the underpainting, the viscosity of the paint, and more importantly is the colour relationship. How do we want to give this narrative that little bit extra beyond the black and white? Is that colour informing the narrative, or is it masking the narrative? Those questions are things I ask myself while I'm painting. But it's that struggle, it's that engagement and that compulsion to solve that problem that keeps me going with oil painting. I think there's a lot of things that are romanticised about oil painting. It's generally put at the top of the tree with above all the other mediums. I think it's on the same tree at a different limb, that's all. The idea, is it being expressed through this medium? Is it clear? Is it coming through? That is the goal. It's not whether or not I make an oil painting and call it a major work. I do believe that painting for me is my biggest struggle, but becomes my biggest compulsion as well. I think the struggle is important. We discover things as we paint. I do, for sure. I find things in the images that I wouldn't have found if I was doing a watercolour. I find that the viscosity of oil brings out, again, a different quality, and that quality can bring about a different narrative once more. I never felt like I was particularly talented, but I was very compelled to do what I did. And I think it's important to realise that if you have a vision, your compulsion to make that vision is much more important than any talent you may have. I do believe that work that has vision and no talent is more interesting than work that has talent and no vision. So I look very much at what I do in terms of being compelled to make this work. If I didn't make it, it would reverse itself on me and cause all sorts of mayhem within my inner world. I think the business of inspiration is a bit overrated. It is a job, after all, coming into the studio. I've never seen it as anything other than that. It's what I've done for the last 40-something years. Anybody who wants to embark on being an artist has to realise that your vision is paramount. The expression of that vision is everything. Whether or not you sell widely or are shown widely has got nothing to do with what we do here. The thing for me is that drives me into the studio every day is, what is it I want to say about myself? So that compulsion is always there. It will always be there until the day I drop at the easel, I guess. And I think that's a thing to bear in mind for all artists. Don't compromise your vision. It's important that you hang on to it. You may adapt it, you may add things to it, it might take the written form or the musical form, but that vision must be kept well and truly protected. I think it's also important as an artist that you have artist friends and you discuss your work and you get a vision of their vision. But I think for me the most important narrative around my narrative is from my wife Carolyn, who is my critic as well as being my support. I think it's important for people who are artists to present their work to people who aren't artists, to see how that work is coming across. So she's been really my guide in many of my works over the last 7 or 8 years now. Somebody who's close enough that you can trust their word, who's going to be honest with you, who's going to tell you how it looks to the world. So I have to take my hat off and a big thank you and a kiss to her for all the support she's given me over these last years we've been together.